Welcome to the How to Succeed podcast, the show that helps you get to the top and stay there. This is how to succeed at knowing when to use an upfront contract. I'm your host, Mike Montague, and my guest this week is Joe Ippolito, a longtime Sandler trainer from Boston. And this podcast is copyrighted by Sandler Systems, Inc., protected by U.S. copyright laws, and you can subscribe anywhere you can listen to podcasts. All right, here we go. It's how to succeed at knowing when to use an upfront contract. Joe, welcome back to the podcast. Tell me a little bit about when to use an upfront contract. That's a Sandler term too, so we should probably define what that is upfront here for everybody and kind of set us up for this episode.
Okay, yeah. First of all, Mike, thanks for having me back. It's good to be back and seeing you again. So it's kind of like a loaded question there, when to use an upfront contract. How about every time, all the time? Anytime you're talking to a prospect, starting a meeting, ending a meeting. And I think there are a lot of other elements to it that it takes a while to really get a good understanding of.
Yeah, what I hear is a lot from our clients is that the word upfront contract kind of makes people think that it's at the upfront of a meeting. And
Right.
that's not necessarily the truth. David Sandler taught it as having these agreements before something interesting happens, no matter what that is. And obviously a meeting is interesting, and the 5 elements of an upfront contract for an agenda are interesting, but there's plenty of other interesting moments in a sales call. Do you want to talk about some of those for us?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think I like to call it not only the upfront contract, but really the art of mutual agreement. Because at the end of the day, I think, when you think of the 5 elements of the upfront contract, the purpose, time, prospect's agenda, our agenda, and then outcomes. It's very fundamental, but it can be taken in so many different areas of a sales call. I kind of equate it to skiing. I don't know if you're a skier. We might have some skiers on the podcast listening in, but there's like 4 or 5 basic elements of skiing, like edge control, outside ski pressure, rotation, and balance. And it's kind of like the elements of an upfront contract. And whether you're skiing as a beginner or advanced terrain, it's the same elements. It's just how well are you at implementing those that makes you successful. And the harder the terrain, and I'll take the hard terrain to a sales call, the more difficult the sales call, your weaknesses show up if you don't know those fundamentals. So as an example, I think when we train the upfront contract, we train an opening meeting, and I think people can wrap their heads around an opening meeting. But it's really like I like to say it's like a ham sandwich, right? So the opening meeting's like the piece of bread on top. Then we put the meat in there. If we don't put that bottom piece of the bread on underneath, that meat falls out. So I think a lot of people have difficulty setting the stage up front so you get that clear agreement and outcomes at the end of every meeting. And that's a struggle for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think one clear spot is definitely the bookends for a meeting for sure. And I think that's really great advice for any salesperson, is to make sure at the end of every call, you have some sort of upfront contract for what happens next, whether that's sending over a contract, another meeting, a follow-up, when and where is it? And I think there's so many places things can go wrong, and we wanted to kind of cover advanced upfront contracts today because you already you nailed the 5 elements. So congratulations, you passed your bronze certification, Joe. But I want to talk about some of these sticky situations, because I think, sometimes people aren't used to keeping their upfront contracts, or they don't know when to make them when things get messy and stuff. Where do you think is maybe some common misconceptions about the upfront contract?
Well, I think you hit it on the head, Mike. I think one of the misconceptions is we deliver an upfront contract, get agreement from the prospect, but the only agreement to that contract is your mind, and the prospect doesn't abide by the agreement. So that's why I like to, when I train to this, and I tell our clients, it's really a mindset of mutual agreement. So your interaction with them, has to be so they want to be on that call. It's not like you're forcing them to pick up the phone when they make an upfront contract and you get people say, well, I had an upfront contract, but they didn't abide by it. Look, good to think upfront contract, but think about the art of mutual agreement. So how you deliver that is as much as implementing the 5 elements. So as an example, if I were doing a follow-up call, and typically when we train an opening meeting, it's like an hour, 45 minutes and things like that. But if I said, something at the end, like, so let's meet for an hour, and that's not necessary. Right. And I'm going to be more adaptable and conversational. And let's say I'm going to be sending them a proposal and for whatever reason, it's going to require a check-in with them. It could be a 1-minute check-in call and carry out an upfront contract sound like this. Hey, Mike, thanks for evaluating the proposal. I know there's still a couple of people you need to talk to. And you said you were on board with everything. Hey, how about if we just do a 1-minute check-in call, be the fastest call of your life? I'll check in where you are, make sure we're on track. If we're not, you can let me know the reasons why. If we are, great. We can talk what happens next.
Yeah.
So it's adapting it conversationally and situationally in the right place at the right time.
I think that makes a ton of sense to me. And 2 things there. I love the mutual agreement as maybe a better term than upfront contract, but I did want to circle back to the contract part, because I think we've also kind of moved away from teaching it that way in foundations, where David Sandler really used to talk about a contract in legal terms. Like, you have to have 2 sane parties. If you have a crazy prospect or client who doesn't keep agreements, then you don't have a contract. You have something you would like to accomplish. Right. So I love that you talked about that a little bit. But I think also, if you thought about working out an agreement with anybody over a contract, right, you would have a conversation. You'd ask them questions in the middle of it and say, when would you like me to follow up? And they say, oh, next week. All right. Is that Monday or Friday? And you would get really clear on the terms if you were going to write this down in a formal contract. I think that helps me get in the right attitude of, do I know what I'm agreeing to? Can I fulfill this contract? Can I fulfill my side of it? Because it's so clear, I know exactly what to do. And will they fulfill their side because it's so clear?
Yeah. So I think the elements and thinking about it as a contract sets the mindset and the equal business stature that why shouldn't we get an agreement to meet? Right. And I also, tongue in cheek, it's a little bit like dating. If we had a great date at night with someone that we really liked and we're getting out of the car, it's 11 o'clock at night, we went to the movies and we said, hey, I really had a great time. I'd love to see you again. And they say, let me think it over. I'll follow up with you in a couple of weeks. We wouldn't accept that as in the world of dating or a lot of other areas.
I've had to accept a couple of those in my time, but yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, we don't come back to our friend or roommate and say, hey, that was a great date. So why would we do it on a sales call? So I think it's that mindset, but I think it's really the art of mutual agreement and how you deliver that upfront contract to get them to want to meet with you.
So let's talk about behavior now and when to do the right thing at the right time. So we've kind of hinted around it. I think there are many upfront contracts for me on prospecting calls. There are other times where upfront contracts become really important other than, starting and ending a meeting. What comes to mind for you when I say do an upfront contract at the right time?
Well, 2 things. Setting it up front is definitely important. Right. So I don't want to set an agreement or not set the agreement. And then at the last minute, even start chasing for like, hey, let me just do a touch follow-up call we don't want to do that. Right. Because, in every meeting, and especially, I don't know if you're finding it, Mike, anecdotally, I think that our meeting, I'm finding, I don't know if it's Zoom or whatever, but meetings are getting a little bit shorter, half hour, 45 minutes. And it's most people have a lot to cover. So you find that those last couple of minutes always fast forward. The tape starts running really quickly. And if you start to have to set that agreement at the end when you're trying to wrap things up, you can tend to feel needy on your end and pressury on the prospect's end. So regardless of what it looks like on the back end, I think you have to set it up on the front end of the expectation that something's going to happen next. And then you can deliver it with negative reversing and, any different technique. Hey, Mike, it wouldn't make sense at the end if we're off track. Please let me know. At the same time, if we're on track, I don't suppose it makes sense to talk about some next steps, maybe even another meeting. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I think upfront is important to lay it out, and then how you bring it to the back piece is really going to be situational, whether it requires another hour meeting, or maybe, when we want to kind of drag in some other people to set it up where, hey, Mike, if it doesn't go well, obviously we don't have to take it beyond here. But if it does, typically at that point, you might be inviting some other people on your side in. But we can talk about that at the end.
Oh, I think that's great. And other people is always one I like to have an upfront contract for, is that like, hey, we're bringing in Sarah. She's going to evaluate this. It's like, okay, what's Sarah's role? Are you talking to Sarah? Am I talking to Sarah? And it's not just the 5 elements in the upfront contract now, but there needs to be lots of investigation over what the situation is, right?
Yeah, that's another great example. So again, it's taking those elements, practicing them on the bunny slope, but now how do you take it into the extreme steep couloirs, right? So as an example, I think, and that's a great example, many times, and if we can, we'd like to get, maybe a couple people involved, 2-3 people in a meeting. We're just not, we'll set an upfront contract, but at the same time, I might go back to you, Mike, and say, hey, Mike, thanks for joining the meeting today. I know we have 45 minutes. Hey, before we get started, what would you like to get out of today's meeting to give you value for the next 45 minutes? And I would go around the room. So again, getting the prospects' agendas, not just laying out my agenda.
Yeah, definitely there. Now, as we move to technique a little bit, I think, we've kind of covered the elements and other things, but there are some interesting ways to use it. You mentioned in a negative reverse. I mentioned a mini upfront contract. What are some advanced techniques for how you actually set an upfront contract?
Well, I think we talk about 5 elements, but I think one that's often forgotten is, how about the big concern or my biggest fear?
Yeah.
And I think very powerful delivering that up front. I was working with a client last week, and I hate to say it's ever commodity business, but it tend to be the oil and gas industry, where even though it might not be a commodity to us, it's a commodity in the industry. And then they're always selling a higher priced item, always higher priced, branded higher price. So every time they go out there, price is always going to be an issue. So delivering a big concern up front with that upfront contract, that maybe sounds something like this. Say I've delivered the elements, and I say, hey, Mike, before I get started, here's my big concern. We're competitive, but at the same time, we're not going to be the cheapest. How are you going to react at the end of this meeting if all goes well, but we don't come in at the lowest price?
Yeah.
Right. So by the way, real world, very powerful in delivering that. Now, in this commodity business, 95% of their prospects say, no, that's not the only thing we're evaluating. Right. So right away, setting that agreement up front, knowing the meeting, obviously price is going to be important, but it's not going to be the number one criteria. And when you deliver a higher price, there's not going to be sticker shock. Great use of big concern, biggest fear up front within the upfront contract.
I love the biggest fear. I think that's a great way to get rid of objections and whatever your concerns are. So it could be an objection, like you mentioned. I like biggest fears sometimes also for shoring up your weaknesses in the sales call. So this is definitely an advanced level tactic. But if you struggle for asking about money, you can say, hey, my biggest fear is that I'm not going to know when to talk about the budget. When you feel like it's ready, will you bring it up? Because I'm always uncomfortable with when we want to talk about that. Or I know salespeople that over talk, right? Say, hey, upfront, upfront here, let's agree that if I'm ever overselling it and you're already, just raise your hand and I'll
Love
stop
that.
talking.
Yeah.
I think that happens a lot. Also for people that are maybe more shy and introverted or slow, say, hey, if I'm thinking about your answer, it doesn't mean I don't know. But my biggest fear is you're going to ask me something that I'm going to really have to think about, or I'm going to have to go back to my boss for. Any of those type of situations. Biggest fear in an upfront contract lets them know you're a professional. You've done this a lot. You've run into the situation before, and we know how to address it when it comes up. So there's not that awkward moment in the call of you know, both sides being confused about something, right?
Well, you're in advanced terrain, Mike. You're in definitely advanced terrain, but applying fundamentals. I think the other point, just based on what you were saying, is a lot of times when prospects force us into a proposal way too quickly. And we know that unless we get a ton of information in that meeting, we're not going to be able to deliver a proposal aligned with what their possible solution to their problem is. So, bringing up a big fear that going to proposal too early may be a problem. You won't be able to get the right information. Another great use of the upfront contract.
Yeah, definitely slow down and get your full upfront contract there. What's the outcome? What's going to happen when this happens and stuff in that situation is great. The last one that came to mind for me was permission. I think many upfront contracts around just asking for permission is really a mutual agreement about what will happen next. So,
Right.
If I say, can I ask you a difficult question? And you say, sure, fire away. Then I've got mutual agreement that what's going to happen next might be an awkward question. And you can't, get offended by it. So I think those are really advancements.
Yeah, no, sorry about that. Yeah, no, I definitely think in prospecting, you think about a prospecting call too, as we segue to that a little bit, you're delivering a mini upfront contract up front, right? Hey, can I grab half a moment, tell you the reason for my call? You can decide if it makes any sense in the world to continue, right?
Yep.
So purpose, time, outcome. So I think people don't necessarily get their head around that at first, that, hey, same thing, mini upfront contract. But at the end of that meeting, they are setting the big upfront contract with the 5 elements on next meeting, purpose, time. If they want to cover anything. So, hey, Mike, I know we're going to get together next week, an hour. Hey, anything in your agenda I should prepare for?
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm going to ask you some questions, and then I can go for the outcome. So, that's the double use of that upfront contract and the prospecting call. But the first part's mini, last part's big. And then just the general segue to open the meeting and referring back to the last upfront contract, super powerful.
Yeah, daisy chaining these together into like a well-lit path for your client that keeps everything comfortable, keeps everybody knowing where the sale is at, I think is huge. It's really, I think maybe one of the most powerful, most impactful lessons that our clients get. So I appreciate you talking it out with us today. Once again, we're talking with Joe Ippolito, longtime Sandler trainer from Boston. And Joe, you've been on the podcast before, so people can search for other episodes from you and hear our cheesy job interview questions that we do. But I thought I would just ask a fun one this time. What is the perfect day for you?
Oh, perfect day. Well, I think you're hitting me at a bad time for a perfect day regarding work, because it's finally a sunny day here in Boston. Nice, a little cool, 35 degrees, but perfect day is like I started today. Love cycling, getting out on my bike first thing in the morning. I'm lucky enough to live by the ocean, so I get a morning sunrise and just really invigorating way to start the day. And as you can tell, I've used some ski analogies. So I am a little depressed that the ski season is coming to a close, but those would be my 2 perfect days: cycling and skiing in the same day, which is sometimes possible around here.
I love that. You get a you get a break, maybe make a sale or something and launch in the clubhouse or after the break, and that's a pretty good day. I'd take that.
That's a great day. That's a perfect day.
Do you have a favorite Sandler rule?
I mean, I love them all. I mean, they're all just, there's so much depth to each of them. They're just, when you think about them and how do you apply them, just like as we're talking about upfront contracts today. But if we're sticking to the upfront contract, I think a great rule is, and I'm going to mess this up because it's loaded with a bunch of double and triple negatives. Don't get mad at a prospect for doing something you said they couldn't do. How did I do with that, Mike?
I think you missed the last one. So the official rule is you can't get mad at a buyer for doing something you didn't tell them they couldn't do.
Yeah.
So if you don't have an upfront contractor, you can't get mad at them for screwing up the upfront contract because it wasn't there. Right?
Or screwing up your sales call.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome and a very applicable Sandler rule today. So let's wrap it up for everybody. We're just you can feel free to repeat yourself. We'll tie it up together in a nice big bow. When thinking about knowing when to use an upfront contract, what is one attitude you'd like people to have?
Equal business stature. You've got great stuff. Prospects have the pen, they have the decision, but you have something that could potentially solve a problem that they're having, and you're an expert. All you need to do is come in with that mindset that you deserve to ask questions and get agreements and share your expertise. If it's a fit, great, you talk next steps. If it isn't, no harm, no foul. Something changes, they know where you are, and go in with that mindset. I think that'll help.
Yeah, you bet. And one key behavior or action item to do.
You got to practice it. Like I think we talked today, there's the 5 elements, but so many use case studies on when and how to apply it, the strategy, situationally, how to apply it. You have to practice it. And by the way, the fundamentals of the 5 elements is what you're going to nail. But again, know it so well that you can apply it situationally across the sales cycle, prospecting calls, before and after meetings. And again, like you, Mike, I've probably delivered an upfront contract 1 million times. It's always sounded a bit different every 1 million times.
So that takes us to our last question. Do you have a favorite technique to use?
Other than the upfront contract or within the upfront contract?
It can be either, but let's say within it.
Well, I think one thing too is, how we teach getting the no upfront or finding out it's a fit. Again, applying it situationally. If I'm deep into a 3-month sales cycle with a prospect and I'm 2 months in, I'm not telling that prospect 2 months in, hey, for whatever reason it's not a fit, you can tell me and that's okay, because that's out of context. So again, you've got to own the principle, but make it colloquial and conversational. I always like to say something, look, I think we can really help you, but last thing I want to do is make any assumptions. So if at any point here, there are any issues, please throw a yellow flag at me so we can course correct. On the other hand, if the path is clear, let's talk what those next steps look like. So again, the colloquialisms within it from practice will get you to where you need to be.
I love it. Thanks for being on the show. Joe Ippolito, Sandler trainer from Boston. If you want more information on upfront contracts, talk to your local Sandler trainer. Go to sandlertraining.com, click on find a training location, or you can reach out to our enterprise team. As always, you can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify. Thank you for listening. And remember, whatever you are, be a good one. The How to Succeed podcast is brought to you by Sandler, the worldwide leader in sales, management, and customer service training with over 200 locations. For more information, visit sandler.com.
The Sandler Summit returns in 2023. Each new event builds exponentially upon the energy and success of the prior year. The 2022 Sandler Summit event was a huge success for everyone who attended, so don't miss the next one. Buy your tickets to the Sandler Summit at sandler.com/summit.